Okay, so inshallah, if you guys would all take a comfortable seated position, so put your distractions to the side. If you have cell phones, anything that your hands are fiddling with, I request you to put that to the side. Give you a couple of moments to get comfortable. And if everyone will partake, everyone will feel comfortable, and everyone will respect each other's space. So I invite you to close your eyes if you feel comfortable. And if you don't feel comfortable closing your eyes, I ask you to gaze down at the floor so that you're allowing everybody else who is participating to take part. And I want you to begin by noticing your breath, noticing your inhale and your exhale. We do this all the time, every moment of our life. And all I'm asking you to do is pay a little bit of attention to the breath. Notice the inhale, notice the exhale. Notice as you inhale, you notice your belly expanding. And maybe when you exhale, you notice your belly collapsing. So just a few moments, noticing your breath. And now I would like you to bring your attention and awareness to your feet. So all you're doing is drawing your attention to your feet and your legs. You're not doing anything different. You're bringing your attention and just asking yourself, what am I noticing and what am I observing in this part of my body? Again, you're inhaling and exhaling. And just being aware and attentive to your feet, to your legs. And then on your next breath, you're moving up, bringing your attention and awareness from your knee to your pelvic area. Maybe you're sitting down or maybe you're standing. Just become aware of the seat underneath you. You're breathing, inhaling and exhaling. No right or wrong way to do it. And you're just bringing awareness to your legs, your pelvic area. And then in your next inhale, I want you to bring your attention to your lower belly. So your abdomen, your lower back. And as you bring your attention to this area, again, you might become aware of your breath. A deep belly breath, inhaling and exhaling. Becoming aware of the expansion and the collapse of the belly. Inhaling and exhaling, bringing awareness to this part of the body. And then on your next inhale, you're going to bring your attention to your shoulders, your chest. Maybe you start to feel some tension there. Maybe all of a sudden you feel the stress you've been having, or maybe not. Maybe you feel nothing. That's okay. You're always with your breath. You're always inhaling and exhaling. And you're just bringing a curious mind, becoming aware of the sensations in your back, your shoulders, and moving on to your arms, from shoulders down to your hands, your fingertips, down bends. Bringing attention and awareness. And again, you're just becoming aware of the sensations present. Maybe becoming aware of judgments like, what is this? Why are you doing this? Why am I doing this? I don't want to do this. So breathing in and out, inhaling and exhaling. In your next inhale, I want you to bring your attention and awareness to your neck and head and face, your hair, your skull, your jaw. Some people pay attention in their jaws. Again, you're just becoming awake and alive and aware. Noticing your eyes, even with the eyelids closed. Maybe you see some dancing colors there. Maybe you don't. And then on the next inhale, I want you to bring attention and awareness to your entirety of the body. So the full body, bringing your full body to awareness. And again, just noticing and becoming aware. Inhaling and exhaling. And come back to your breath. Take some really deep, intentional breaths in. Inhaling all the way to the belly. And exhaling. And do that for 2 more times. Inhaling, exhaling. 1 more time, inhaling, exhaling. And then slowly opening your eyes. And then slowly you can look around you and get acclimated to the surrounding around you. So that's a body awareness exercise. And that's supposed to bring you awake and alive and hopefully present and fully attentive to this presentation that we're going to be having.
Thank you so much for leading us in that activity. So I hope you guys are all more awake and more ready for the evening that we have in store for you guys. Mindfulness is something that we're going to discuss later in the evening. So we know there's a stigma surrounding mental health in our community, and when I say our community, I'm referring to the Muslim community, when there shouldn't even be a stigma around it. And so that's one of the purposes of this event is we want to start this dialogue surrounding mental health and discussing various causes that people can experience that leads to mental health issues, and which include the emotional and cognitive well-being of individuals. And so we'll also be discussing their preventative measures and some coping methods with an Islamic lens on how to deal with these issues.
So the roots of mental health are visible in the Holy Quran and traditions of the Prophet ﷺ. As we know, our beloved Prophet had one of the most hardest lives that any human can ever bear. And he had so many different trials and tribulations throughout his lifetime. However, he still remains optimistic, positive throughout his hardships. So we hope this conversation that we have tonight sheds some light on mental health and helps each and every one of us be like the Prophet and dealing with difficulty in our everyday lives.
So one of the verses the brother beautifully recited was in Surah Baqarah, verse 286, which says, Allah does not task any soul beyond its capacity. And we were wondering, Dr. Thea, can you please elaborate on those verses and what it means in terms of going through hardships and difficulties in general?
Bismillah. Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. By the way, if anyone doesn't know, that's just a basic way of beginning in the name of God, praising God. And that was actually a prayer of Moses when Moses was tasked with going to Pharaoh. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told him to go to Pharaoh. Pharaoh is the most ruthless person on the face of the earth, and Allah told him, go tell him to release Beni Israel who were slaves. And Moses, or Musa, he has a lisp. He's not even articulate, right? And when he's tasked with this command, he makes this dua, and he says, Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri. Oh Allah, open my heart. Because his heart was constricted and full of fear and anxiety, right? And who doesn't experience that, right? Because Allah, open my heart. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri. And make my task easy, right? Wahlul 'uqdatan min lisani. And open this knot that I have on my tongue. It's so hard to speak, I'm so afraid, right? Paralyzed by fear. Which is a mental state. It's a spiritual state, but it's a mental state as well, right? So people can understand what I'm saying. So you hear people say that all the time before they begin speaking, like in talks and stuff. That's what that means. It's quite relevant to what we're talking about, because it's all about anxiety and coming to a state of stillness, which is what the sister just took us through, right? And the verse where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says at the end of Surah Baqarah is لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها. Allah doesn't task any soul with a burden more than it can bear. This has to be like one of just the most fundamental principles that we just install and always carry with us all throughout our lives, no matter what we're going through, no matter what the burden is, family, social, friend, religious, whatever. Allah gave you something, a capacity that lets you bear. He says, wusa. Wusa is like the breath to hold something. That's what that means. Like Allah says, wa ardullahi wasi'ah. Same word. Like Allah's earth is expansive. And He also gave you this expansive ability. If you just access it, He gave you this expansive ability, this thing inside you that which can expand to accommodate more and more burdens, right? And everyone's expansive capacity is different. Like Allah says about Himself, one of His names is Al-Wasi', right? The one who expands, right? He expands essentially your chest. He expands your horizon. He expands so many things for you. So when He says that Allah doesn't task a soul with a burden more than what it can bear, more than what it can expansively contain. He's saying, I know you're going through things. I know you're going through something right now. I know there's a difficulty, and sometimes you might be telling yourself, I just can't handle it. This is too much, right? Every single one of us goes through that moment in life. And some people just end their lives because they can't take it. And Allah is telling us here, you can take it. You've been given something to be able to handle. And by the way, وَلَا تَزِرُ وَازِرَةٌ وِزْرَ أُخْرَى, in another verse, you can't handle the burden of someone else. So the burden that someone has with their family, or the burden that someone has with their children, or the burden that someone has with their school and whatnot, you can't handle their burden. Because they've been given something specific to them to be able to handle that, right? They can't handle your burden because you've been given something specific to handle your own burden. And sometimes it's simply a matter of channeling that, recognizing that, appreciating that. And the role of Iman, or faith, is to manage that. Not to be immune to that, because everyone's going to get to manage it. And at the end of the verses, Allah says, where Allah teaches us to say, رَبَّنَا وَلَا تُحَمِّلْ عَلَيْنَا إِصْرًا كَمَا حَمَلْتُ عَلَى الَّذِينَ مِن قَبْلِنَا رَبَّنَا وَلَا تُحَمِّلْنَا مَا لَا طَاقَةَ لَنَا بِهِ. Oh Allah, don't burden us with a burden that you have burdened other people with, or with a burden beyond what we can talk as your capacity to handle something, more than what you can bear. So one to keep in mind is that you'll never be tasked with something beyond the ability that you've been given to handle it. And two, you should always humble yourself and continuously ask Allah for the capacity to bear whatever is given to you and never to be overburdened.
So, Dr. Kia, very helpful answer. So, like Dr. Kim mentioned, there are so many hadiths and Quran verses on difficulties in general. However, let's talk about mental health more specifically. Sister Musarat, you can so kindly explain to us what exactly is mental health. I know this is a very broad question, and you can go on about this, but what is mental health from a college student perspective, such as depression, anxiety, and stress?
So, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So what I'll do is I'll begin with a little bit of a story to explain what is mental health. So there are two girls, Mariam and Nisriya, and they both have an exam coming up. Let's say it's a really high stress exam, something like the MCAT, or something very, very stressful. Now, it makes sense that they are both worried how they will do. They're really worried about the exam. Mariam, on the day of the exam, wakes up and she's worried how she's going to do later that day during the exam. So it's budget time, and what she does is she goes to pray. So she says her prayers and says a dua to Allah to help her during the exam. And on the other side of town is Miss Ria, and she hears the alarm, and she gets up with the thought, oh my God, I'm going to fail this exam. And she hits the snooze button and goes back to sleep until maybe, an hour later when she finally hits the snooze button for the last time or turns the alarm off, gets up, quickly says her prayers. Now they had both intended to do one last study session. So both Mariam and Miss Ria in their respective apartments or spaces, they turn their lights on and they go to the kitchen and they want to nourish themselves before they sit down for their last little review. Mariam goes and makes some warm water with some lemon in it and has that to drink to nourish her body before she sits down and does her final study. Miss Ria goes and she grabs a cup of coffee and downs that before she begins to study. Now, during the study session, they're both feeling very stressed. This exam is in a couple of hours. They're going to have to soon get ready to go. They're having lots of thoughts about how they'll do, what's going to happen, etc. Mariam is using deep breaths, like what we did earlier. Long inhales, long exhales to stay calm, to stay focused. She's telling herself, you can do this, right? Nobody's watching her. And Miss Ria, on the other hand, she's doing her studies too. She's texting her friends, letting them know how worried she is. She might be throwing in a couple of curse words here and there. And she's distracted. She's really worried. She is going through thoughts of, I didn't study enough. I'm not going to make it. I can't believe I got myself into this. It's knowing time. And Mariam realizes that, she needs to get up and get ready for her exam. So she gets up, and even though she does not feel like eating, because when we're anxious, we sometimes don't feel like eating, she goes ahead and eats a sandwich and a salad. And then she calls her mom to say that, hey mom, I'm getting ready, I'm on my way to my exam, and I'm really worried. And this is what her mom tells her. Of course you're worried. It's a big test. It makes sense. I'm thinking about you, and I'm praying for you. I'm sure you've done a lot to prepare for this exam. And I'm sure you will do just fine. Call me if you need me. Otherwise, when you finish, let me know. It's 1 o'clock, and Miss Ria, in her apartment, realizes, oh my goodness, I need to jet out, otherwise I'm going to be late. So what does she do? She grabs some bar to eat on her way out, and she gives her dad a call. Now this is what her dad says. Don't be stressed. It won't help you. You've got to do well in this exam, otherwise you'll be delayed another year or semester, whatever that is. You're my daughter, you can do it. Now it's several hours later, they're both taking their tests, they're done, they leave their exam rooms and walk into their car. Mariam is feeling relieved, she's feeling stressed, she's feeling happy, and she's feeling frustrated. So she calls her mom again, lets her know she's done the exam, and she explains to her that she's relieved that it's over, that she's stressed about the results, and that she's happy that she did study most of the things, and she is feeling good about the exam. And then she's frustrated because there's one area of studies that she didn't study as well, and guess what? There were 2 or 3 questions on that. She knows that she probably didn't get those. And what does her mom respond? Her mom reassures her that all her feelings make sense, right? All both the frustration, as well as the happiness. It all makes sense. And she lets her know that she's proud of her, that, I'm sure that she did well for the most part. And they end their conversation. And then Mariam goes with her friends for a dinner or a dinner out, to celebrate getting done with the exam. She put in a lot of effort. Misra does not call her dad. She's too stressed. She doesn't want to hear her dad and what he may have to say. She's continuing to think about what if she failed. And she drives to Starbucks and gets another coffee, and then she goes home to binge watch her favorite TV show. Okay? Now, these are really extreme examples, but we know there are some who are exactly like that, or more so, we all have some elements of both of these individuals that I've described. What I try to describe is aspects of what somebody who has a healthy mental health may look like versus somebody who may not have a healthy mental health and who does not know how to deal with stress and anxiety. So what is mental health, okay? This is the simple definition, and then it's okay, I'll take a little bit of time and kind of dive into it a little bit more. So mental health from the mentalhealth.gov, yay for Google, right? So this is their definition. Mental health includes our emotional, psychological, and social well-being. So think of it as a triangle. Emotional well-being, psychological well-being, and social well-being. It affects how we think, how we feel, and how we act. So another triangle. How do we think? Our thoughts. How do we feel? The sensations we feel, the emotions we feel. And how do we go about acting on those actions? Mental health determines how we handle stress, how we relate to others, and how we make choices. So that's kind of a simple, straightforward answer. So what I want to do is talk a little bit about kind of the more recent research around the brain, and somebody that I study around, whose work I study, which is Daniel Siegel. Daniel Siegel is a neuropsychiatrist, and he studies the brain. And so when we think of mental health, what do we think of? What do we compare it to? We compare it to, for example, physical health. Physical health, we say, is the health of the body, right? The body that we can touch. If I have a healthy body, if I don't have diabetes, if I can run, if I can walk, if I'm not taking pills, I am a healthy physical being. Mental health, when we think of it, is the health of the mind, right? Now, what is the mind? Do we have a definition of the mind? Is the mind the brain? It's not. So Daniel Siegel, when he was doing his research on what is the mind, he said there was no one single definition by various scientists on the definition of the mind. So anthropologists, psychologists, psychiatrists, there was no one agreement on one definition of what the mind is. So he came up with his own. And this is what he says the mind is. The mind is an embodied and relational process. So what does he mean by that? The mind is embodied. Embodied means that the mind is the whole body. The brain, including the brainstem, and the brainstem connects to the rest of the body. So part of the mind is our connection to our whole body. It is a relational process that regulates the flow of energy and information. Now, if this seems like a loaded definition, it feels loaded from too. It's a really scientific, and because I know Daniel Siegel, he has like a whole book defining this one definition. But just think of it as a river, okay? Think of it as a river. On one side of the river is, if you veer to one side of the river, it's very chaotic. And if you go to the other side of the river, you can drown, and it's very, it's not calm, it's just very deep, and you can go under. So a mind is a process that regulates the flow of energy and information in the middle of the river. We want to stay in the middle of the river. And a healthy mind, he studied, this is his definition, a healthy mind will have 9 components, and it will be able to do 9 things. A healthy mind will regulate our bodies. A healthy mind will be able to engage in attunement and resonance. Attunement and resonance is, you know, when you talk to your best friend and they really, really get you, that's attunement. Misattunement is when you tell your mom something and she has no clue what you're talking about and instead tells you the worst thing that you could hear. That's misattunement, right? I'm not saying everybody's not like that, I'm just saying, just giving an example, okay? A healthy mind will have emotional balance. So just like Mariam who experienced anxiety, frustration, sadness, happiness, right? Relief. It's a balance of emotions. A healthy mind can extinguish fear. It has the ability to pause before acting. So anger has a bad reputation, right? Why? Because we think of the actions of anger. We think of somebody punching as anger. Punching is bad, right? That's the action. But anger is emotion. So when we have a healthy mind, we have the ability to pause before acting. A healthy mind allows us to have empathy. Something lacking in politics right now. A healthy mind will have insight, a map to your own experiences, to your own kind of mental health, to your own schema. A healthy mind will have morality. Morality, as defined by Daniel Siegel, is the ability to see that we are a part of one living being, which for me is a very Islamic statement, right? We are all from Allah created us. We are all one. That's morality. And the 9th is intuition. So when we have good mental health, a good, healthy mind, we also have the ability to tap into our intuition, which is the wisdom of our body. One more definition I want to throw in there, and maybe we'll elaborate on this. Okay, so there's one other scientist that adds a few other pieces that it didn't talk about here, but it goes in this social aspect. A person with a healthy mental health will also have good family connections, which you saw in the story of Mariam, will have good spiritual connection with God or meditation. Even the atheists that do not believe in God, they are going to meditate. They are trying to see a bigger meaning of their life, right? So spiritual connection, family connection, connection to peers, good friends, and exercise and food, these also have a huge contribution to good mental health. Okay, so that's my really long.
No, it's okay, but thank you for going so in depth and giving us so many different perspectives. And I really appreciated the story as well that you gave. I think a lot of us could have related to it as well. Dr. Theo, is there anything that you wanted to add on to that at all?
I think she nailed it. Covered a lot. No, not necessarily. I think there's different people in the realm of psychology and psychiatry have defined mental health in different ways. It's really something more that you experience more than you define. But you look at, for example, I think one thing that's interesting when you look at, if you go to Barnes and Noble, right, and you go just kind of walk through the aisles, and one of the sections that seems to be bigger and bigger is like self-help, right? And it's like you look at the books, it's all about happiness, 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 right? But it's not really it's all really mental health. It's really what it is, and because people, they're not happy. They're anxious. They're depressed. It's a byproduct of the society that we live in. We're struggling really to define this, and that's why I think events like this are really so important to not just to be able to just define things, but to explore things, you know, and just kind of like talk out loud a little bit, right? And get just bounce ideas off of your head. So very comprehensive definition.
Thank you. Going off of all of that, Sister Musarat, could you explain the possible causes for different mental health issues? Some that you may have previously mentioned.
Yeah, so what are the causes of different mental health issues? Okay, so one, I don't think scientists have like pinpointed one exact cause of mental health issues, but there are various things that they say are contributions to somebody not having mental health, right? So one is, for example, hereditary, our genes. If in your family you have a history of mental health disorders, then there's a higher chance that you may also experience mental health. Now, many of us may come from families where there may not be a named history of mental health. But what people will tell you, so when I do a history, I do ask about family history. And people will say that, well, nobody was diagnosed. However, I know that this auntie was probably going through depression. I, for example, heard once a story about my grandmother, and that one story was like, oh my goodness, she had bipolar depression. So we may hear things like that, right, from our families, and we want to pay attention to that so that we can become more self-aware about our own experience and how we can help ourselves. Another cause that might cause a mental health illness or disorder could be a stressful event. So sometimes in psychology, we'll say like a mental break will happen. And for example, in college, there's high stress, but sometimes there's a change in life, which is a high stress situation that kind of maybe unlocks that mental health illness, and that results in that person experiencing mental health. So it could be a major stressful event. And it could be something like, even for example, divorce affecting children, divorce affecting the person getting divorced. It could be financial stress, it could be moving, it could be multiple things. Another stressful event is like an accident. Okay, so an accident to the brain, traumatic brain injury, that can cause a mental health disorder. And accidents I want to elaborate here are, it could be like, for example, you're in a car crash, and then, as a result of that car crash, if there is an injury to the brain, then you may experience a mental health disorder or act in such a way that fits one of those criteria, right? However, an accident can also happen in childhood that can later come out. A person who may be having mental health issues, in their history, they may learn that in their early childhood, they may have had an accident where they fell down, they hit their head. Daniel Siegel and his, these neuroscientists who actually research the brain and go into the brain and look at the brain, they're able to see and do these scans where, like, this person who is now experiencing depression or bipolar depression, had this fall when they were 3 years old, and for example, it hit this part of the head, and behind this part of our head is what's called the middle prefrontal cortex, which is where the 9 things that I listed of a healthy mind are affected by this part of the brain. So accidents, substance abuse can also induce mental health disorders. So I know that hopefully none of you guys are experimenting, but keep it at that if you are. But substance use can cause serious mental health disorders. So I'll give you a little quick story. I was working for Child Protective Services, and that's where you see some really, cases you wish never existed, So I had, for every child that I have a case of, you have to see both their parents, and even their parents who may be incarcerated. So one time I had to go and see somebody who was incarcerated, and when I went there, they were in the cell, they were locked in this small cell, and they were yelling Jesus and talking to Jesus, and they were delusional, they were psychotic. What were they doing? They were using marijuana that was dipped in embalming fluid. So, and marijuana is also one of those drugs where it's not just marijuana, there's stuff in there to make you more addicted. Okay, but before I get sidetracked on that, so this person is now going to have mental health deficits probably for the rest of their life, because they were having they were abusing substances. Then there's something called attachment trauma. Attachment trauma is and this is where majority of my focus is, and majority of where I like to do the research, and where some of the new research on psychology is kind of heading, is this theory that in childhood, our early childhood experience really shapes who and how we become for the rest of our lives. So in early childhood, there's something called an attachment to our primary caregiver that we form. Majority of us will have a secure attachment. A secure attachment, a child with a secure attachment will grow up to have secure attachment as an adult, and they will be somebody like Mariam. They will have healthy coping mechanisms, healthy relationships, the ability to trust and navigate the world, and know how to navigate the world. Now, people who do not have secure attachment, there are three major types of what's called attachment traumas that they have. One is called anxious attachment, avoidant attachment, and disorganized attachment. Disorganized attachment is really those people who have had physical, sexual, mental abuse, and their attachment to their caregiver is really disorganized because they had a disorganized life. Think about if there is abuse going on in the home. Okay, so there is attachment trauma, which really, we'll talk about that later, but that's another cause. And then I do want to just kind of throw in there, what we eat is what we become. It's really important that we pay attention to what we're putting into our bodies. And there's a whole lot of research on what we eat is what we become.
Just a lot for that, sister. So, we think it's really important to know the possible causes that you explain, because it needs, someone to understand and help you cope with mental health. Dr. is so from, the Islamic perspective, what she mental health from a scientific perspective. What does Islam say about mental health? And what are certain hadiths and verses in the Quran that touch on?
It's very real, and the framework and kind of like the whole umbrella of mental health and how broad it is and how much it encompasses of different things, it's quite vast. And the whole focus of Islamic literature touches on essentially all of that. And I'll give you a few examples. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ used to make a dua, a prayer, and he would seek refuge in 8 things. 8 things in prayer, a single prayer. Very, very important prayer. We should all just take this with us today, right? You say, Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min al-hammi wal-huzn. These are the first two. Oh Allah, I seek refuge in you from anxiety and sadness. Okay? Now, anxiety comes up over and over again in many different hadiths, many different parts of the Quran, many different, like another dua, وَلَا تَجْعَلِ الدُّنْيَا أَكْبَرَ هَمِّنَا. Don't make this world the biggest source of our anxiety, right? And ham is talked about in the Quran, and the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ used to make another dua, اجعل هذا القرآن عظيما اجعل هذا القرآن عظيم ربيع قلبي. Make this Quran, make it like the light spring that brings my heart back to life. Right? ربيع قلبي وجلال حزني وذهاب همي. And make it so that it takes my sadness away and that it takes my anxiety away. So anxiety is talked about over and over again in many different ahadith. What he says, one of the most honest names, one of the most truthful names that you can give someone is Hammam. Hammam is the one who constantly toils. Right? Anyone here have a friend named Hammam? Right? No? It's common here. The one who constantly toils. It's not just physical toil, it's mental toil, right? So the first thing he seeks refuge from is anxiety. We'll talk more and more about anxiety. There's something to say about that. But also huzn, sadness. And huzn is one of these general terms that have all the different, it's just an umbrella. It encompasses depression, right? Clinical, subclinical, right? Colloquial, whatever way in which you talk about depression encompasses. So he says, I seek refuge from anxiety, depression. وَمِنَ الْعَجَزِ وَالْكَسْلِ. And from ajaz and kasl. Ajaz is incapacity, to just not be capable of doing something. It's like being paralyzed. You know what's interesting about PTSD? That's what it does, essentially, right? If you know anyone here who has post-traumatic stress disorder, they're oftentimes paralyzed by something, or they're triggered by something. It could be a trigger, but it could paralyze you. Mentally, you just feel like you're just frozen, right? Because you heard something or you saw something. And it just encompasses that, right? Or it's a strong sense of insecurity, right? It's a strong sense of just not being capable, right? And that's a mental health issue at times. And kasal is just laziness, not really a mental health issue. That's number 4, right? وَمِنَ الْجُبْنِ وَالْبُخْلِ. And from number 5 and 6 is I seek refuge in you from being a coward, right? And from being miserly, right? Just not wanting to spend. وَغَلَبَةِ الدَّيْنِ وَقَهْرِ الرِّجَالِ. And being overwhelmed with that. A lot of times mental health issue leads to that, right? Because you're overspending and something, you're spending on drugs. Or being number 8, being overwhelmed by people. Like someone can easily overwhelm me, right? That's what that means. And people who don't have a positive or a balanced mental health, as the sister was talking about, they often feel overwhelmed, right? This whole hadith is actually talking about things that are related to mental health. And Allah says in the Quran, وَلَا تَهِنُوا وَلَا تَحْزَنُوا وَأَنْتُمُ الْأَعْلَوْنَ إِن كُنتُم مُؤْمِنِينَ. Don't ever belittle yourselves. This is a big part of mental health, right? Don't ever belittle yourselves. Now, humility is one thing, okay? Humility is when you put your head on the ground before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and you realize that you're in complete need of Him and He's completely independent of you. That's humility, right? But when you belittle yourself unnecessarily sometimes, like, oh, I'm just not worth it. Imposter syndrome. I'm no good this. I'm no good that. I just wish I wasn't born. I wish. You're just belittling yourself. Allah says, don't do that. You are an insan. This is a sacred word. Listen, this word insan is sacred, right? Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says He has dignified Bani Adam with karam. Right? وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. We have dignified the son of Adam, right? And so insan is something sacred. Don't ever belittle yourself, right? وَلَا تَهِنُوا وَلَا تَحْزَنُوا. And don't be sad. وَلَا تَحْزَنُوا. Don't be frustrated. Don't be sad. Don't give in to sadness. وَأَنْتُمُ الْأَعْلَوْنَ إِن كُنتُم مُؤْمِنِينَ. You have the upper hand if you truly have faith. I want to say something about faith. How much time I got? I want to say something about faith. Because faith, don't ever think that faith keeps you from being sad. No. This is a big problem we have as Muslims. This is why we want to brush it under the carpet. But just pull yourself together, brother. I mean, come on. We don't want to admit that who has faith can be sad, but it's very, very possible, right? You could have the highest faith in the world and still fall into some kind of depression. Because Iman, the role of Iman, is not to keep you from becoming depressed or to keep you from becoming anxious. خُلِقَ الْإِنسَانُ عَجُولًا, Allah said. He created mankind ajul, which is to be like in a hurry, in a state of a rush. That's how you were created. You're not going to get out of that, right? The role of faith is to help you manage it. Not to get out of it, not to be immune to it, but to manage it when it does hit you. Vis-a-vis your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the role of Iman, right? And Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ دَاءً إِلَّا أَنزَلَ لَهُ دَوَاءً. Allah did not send down any disease. If you want to call mental health a disease, and all the different manifestations of that, a disease, Allah did not send down any disease, except that He also sent down its cure. Now, here's the role of optimism, right? Which is so important when it comes to mindset and mental health, right? There is a way out of all of this. There is a light at the end of the tunnel, right? The cure, it could be pharmacological, or it could be, a psychotherapy type of cure. But there is a cure, and there is a way out of all.
Thank you, Dr. Dia. I think your answer was very insightful, and I think understanding our deen helps a lot. Understanding what our deen says about mental health helps a lot with the feeling of hopelessness and being lonely that I know everyone feels at certain times. And like Zayn previously mentioned, we know the Prophet ﷺ dealt with many difficulties in his life. And can you explain to us how the Prophet ﷺ dealt with his mental health?
So, brother was alluding to this earlier. The Prophet Muhammad, he had one of the most difficult lives of any human being. And he says that the prophets are tried more than anyone else, right? The trials and tribulations of the prophets. Just imagine for a moment, right? Just imagine. This man lost his mom when he was 6. Lost his mom when he was 6. His dad died before he was born. He lost his grandfather, right? When he was 8. Okay? He's raised by his uncle and essentially by his tribe, Bani Hashim. The man was raised an orphan in a society, you have to understand the Arab society at that time. Orphans were always seen as burdens. What if you lived in a place, okay, where you constantly felt like you were a burden on the people around you? How psychologically difficult would that be? Okay? His uncle did his best never to make him feel like a burden. But his uncle was essentially all he had. And in a time when after he is a prophet and tasked with this prophethood, and through 13 years in Mecca, constantly seeing people being tortured, and his tribe and his clan suffering because of his message, like how much psychological burden is that? The two people that he has in his life that are his anchors, Abu Talib, his uncle, and his wife, Khadija, Amul Huzn, it's called the year of sadness. This year, both of them die. And then add on top of that, every one of his children die before he does. Except one, Fatima. Every one of his children otherwise die before he does. How many parents do you know who outlived multiple children? Imagine the burden, the difficulty, right? Yet still, Anas ibn Malik says, who was his servant, I never saw the Prophet look at him except that he was smiling. In fact, one of the female companions who was in war, right? The Battle of Uhud, Sumayya, she was in war in the Battle of Uhud. She says there was a moment when I looked at the Prophet in the midst of war, he was actually smiling in the battlefield. Like an ocean of peace despite having the most difficult life any human being could ever have. And instead of just going into all this, I want to give you a brief story, okay? Do I have 5 minutes? Okay. I want to relate the story. I took this photo from Ibn Kathir. Ibn Kathir is one of the most recognized authoritative traditional figures in Sirah, right? The biography of the Prophet Muhammad, right? Now the thing about Ibn Kathir, and that's different from the other narratives of Sirah, Ibn Kathir is very, very careful about authentic narrations. So he's not just going to throw this one in there, he's going to find the most authentic. He's only going to use narrations that are sahih. There's a reason why I'm saying this, and you're about to see why. Okay? So Ibn Kathir, in his Sirah, he is talking about Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the early phases of revelation. You guys know the story. Initially, revelation comes to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay? He doesn't know what it is. He's very confused, right? Which is a sign of his honesty and trustworthiness, because if someone was pulling a scam, they would have came down that mountain saying, "I just saw the light. Follow me," right? No, he came down the mountain and says, "I don't know what just happened." That's the sign of someone who's honest, right? And the revelation kept coming to him for some time, and every time it would come to him, it would reassure him. Okay, but then something happened. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ began to preach. Okay, and he began to tell his closest family members and everything, Allah is one. This polytheism is false, so on and so forth. Okay, and all of a sudden, boom, the revelation stopped. Just stopped. And some people say it stopped for about 6 months. Out of all the things I just told you that happened to the Prophet, all of the incidents that happened to his life that made him sad, nothing was heavier than this. And I'll show you why. Okay? This is Ibn Kathir. I'm going to read and translate one paragraph. Y'all ready? قال البخاري في روايته ثم فتر الوحي حتى حزن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم فيما بلغنا حزنا. Then all of a sudden, the revelation stopped. Here we are, we're in the middle of the story. All of a sudden, the revelation stopped, and the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ became sad. The same word I talked about earlier in the hadith, huzn, sadness. Right? Not just any sadness, extremely sad. It's a type of Arabic usage here that leaves your imagination to fill in the blank. Okay? غدا منه مرارا كي يتردد من رؤوس شوائق الجبال. So he decided, I'm going to go back up. Where's this? This is Ibn Kathir. Very authentic. He said, I'm going to go right back up that mountain that I got revelation from to the very top of it and throw myself off. Let's just pause here for a moment. Okay? What does that sound like? Now, we're not going to use the word depression for the Prophet Muhammad. It's not the fitting of the honor that is due to him, right? What does that sound like to you? He's saying this, okay? فكلما أوفى بذروة جبل لكي يلقى نفسه. Every time he got to the top of that mountain to throw himself off, تبدل له جبريل فقال يا محمد إنك رسول الله حقا. He would see Jibreel in the sky, and then right before he jumped off, Jibreel would say to him, "Oh Muhammad, you are truly the messenger of Allah." Right? فيسكن لذلك جأشه. So his agitation, we're about mental health, his internal agitation found stillness. Sakina, which is the opposite of, sakina is tranquility, which is the opposite of anxiety, right? وَتَقَرَّ نَفْسَهُ فَيَرْجَعُ. And his soul found solace and he would go back. Ibn Kathir. This is from Bukhari. Okay? He wrote a very authentic book of hadith. What happened after this? After this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed Surah Duha. And I would encourage After leaving here today, talking about mental health, I would encourage everyone now to go back. When you go home tonight, read Surah Duha. Because what's in Surah Duha? All the basic elements of psychotherapy that is used today to treat sadness and depression. And I'm going to run through it in 4 minutes. Is that okay? 3 minutes. What duha wal layli idha saja? Allah swears by two things. A duha, okay, which is the brightest and prettiest part of the day, and then layl, he swears by the night, which was a sajah, which is the stillest part of night. Sajah is the stillest part of night. And the contrast here, the ulama say, is very similar to human emotions. Because duha is like busy, it's hustle, it's bustle, it's bright, there's light, and there's emotions that reflect that. And sajah is stillness and darkness and maybe sadness, and there's emotions that reflect that. Verse number 3, Allah did not forsake you, right? Nor did He leave you. One of the biggest reasons that people get sad and they get depressed is that they feel alone. In fact, that's one of the biggest risk factors to becoming depressed and actually committing suicide, is not having a social network in your life. In fact, there's a book called Blue Zones, where it was published by National Geographic. They went around the world to look for places where people live the longest. Okinawa, Japan, Loma, California, some city in Italy, I can't remember, Costa Rica. 7 places, I can't remember all 7. But they found these people live longer than anyone else in the world. And one of the reasons was they don't commit suicide, they don't get depressed, they have very, very strong social networks, right? What's a stronger network to be connected to than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Ma wadda'aka rabbuk wa ma qala. Allah has not left you, nor has He forsaken you. وَلَلْآخِرَةُ خَيْرٌ لَكَ مِنَ الْأُولَى وَلَسَوْفَ يُؤْتِيكَ رَبُّكَ فَتَرْضَىٰ. And what is to come is better than what you have now. Depressed people have this thing called perceptual narrowing. They're focused on right now. They can't see tomorrow. They can't see a week from now. They can't see 2 weeks from now, right? And psychologists call that perceptual narrowing. You're so sad and you're so worried that like your mind tunnel visions to just 2 feet right in front of you. But if you can help someone see beyond that 2 feet, you can really help start to take them out of that position of sadness, right? And Allah says, what is to come is better than what you have right now. Right? He's opening that perceptual widening, okay? أَلَمْ يَجِدْكَ يَتِيمًا فَآوَى. Did I not find you an orphan and I brought you in? وَوَجَدَكَ ضَالًا فَهَدَى. And I found you wandering and I guided you. وَوَجَدَكَ عَائِلًا فَأَغْنَى. And I found you poor and I enriched you. Who here hasn't felt like at one point in their life they were wandering and Allah guided them? Who here hasn't felt like at one point in their life they were just poor and they were enriched by something? Like, who here hasn't felt like they were an orphan in some sense and someone brought them in, right? And the thing is, Allah is reminding him of all this because he's been through worse. And you've been through worse, right? But Allah brought you out of that. He brought you out of the worst situations you were in life. He'll bring you out of this one too. And so sometimes, like in the verse right before, Allah took him to the future. But sometimes you need to go to the past. And you need to see, wait, things were just as bad before, if not worse. Allah brought me out of that. Right? So the orphan, don't neglect their plight. The poor person, don't turn them away. You know, study after study shows one of the quickest ways you get out of depression and sadness is to be altruistic. You want to get out of some state of sadness you're in? Go donate some money. Go donate your time. Go volunteer for this. Go volunteer for that. Study after study has shown that is the quickest way to get out of sadness. Right? Stop worrying about yourself. It's not you feeding your own nafs is not going to make you happy. But you helping someone else get out of their burden, that will make you happy. And that's just the way Allah created it. Right? The last verse, وَأَمَّا نِعْمَةِ رَبِّكَ hadith. I find this so interesting. And the blessings of your Lord, talk about them. Right? Now, actually, hadith could mean create them. It could mean that too. So, like, act in reflection of how Allah has blessed you. That's one thing. The other meaning could be talk about the blessing. It could actually put people's brains under functional MRI machines. And they've looked at those areas of the brain that release dopamine, which makes you happy, right? And they've realized that if you simply talk about things you're grateful for, the parts of your brain that release dopamine are more active. And they found that those neuronal connections in your brain that are important to release dopamine, they get solidified the more you talk about things that you're grateful for. Ever seen someone like that? They're just like so optimistic, they're so happy, like alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah this, alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. And then by the end of your conversation with it, you're like, alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah, right? You know, because it's infectious, right? But then you see they're so happy, right? Again, Rasulullah was so optimistic, right? Everything he would look at from an optimistic point of view, right? That's how he would deal with it. He would deal with it vis-a-vis his relationship with Allah, vis-a-vis the Quran. You know, nowadays when you read books on psychotherapy, all of these things are in there, right? But Allah, He created us, He knows better, and we can pause it.
So, well, Dr. Kia, like you mentioned, Prophet went through so many difficulties. However, one thing that you mentioned too, no matter how difficult one day was, he knew that the next day was going to be more difficult, but yet he was still so optimistic. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to be like the Prophet healing mental health issues. Oftentimes we do not realize that the things that we go through can leave a lasting impact on our mental health. That leads us to not solving these issues.
So we're going to actually take a moment and go back to the mindfulness activity that we did earlier. And I think it's something that's really important is being mindful, practicing mindfulness, everything we do. So, Sister Musarat, could you explain what exactly mindfulness is and how we can practice it ourselves?
So mindfulness is really simple. It's pure awareness. What is pure awareness? It's really bringing your attention to the present moment, fully aware and awake. Now, what do we usually do in our life? I know Dr. Kia kind of mentioned about this depressed person that's, very tunnel vision. But an anxious person, which is kind of like the hustle bustle that we live in, we're constantly in a state of worry, thinking about the future or thinking about the past. And we're never really present to what's happening right now. And so that's what mindfulness is really about. It's a way of living where instead of living in the future, which is non-existent, right? Or the past, which is also already gone. It's a way of living where you are fully present to what's happening in this moment and what's really only present to your senses, to your internal experience in this present moment. It's being fully awake. And we have this idea in Islam. It's not a very foreign concept to us. Yes, we take mindfulness research from the West. Daniel Siegel has done a lot of research. We take it from the East. The Buddhists are known for meditation. But the biggest mindfulness activity, the most beautiful meditation that we have in Islam is the prayer. And why is it the prayer elevates one person towards Allah? Why is that? It's because a very mindful and attentive act if we are fully awake in that prayer. Right? What is one thing we're supposed to do when we stand for prayer? We're supposed to realize who we're standing in front of, our Lord. But we're just like, okay, let's finish this prayer, I've got to go study, gotta go come to this event, for example, right? So mindfulness mindfulness is about awakening ourselves and really being fully there. And that's why when I did the exercise at the beginning, we did a body awareness exercise to bring your body to the here and now. So how we can practice mindfulness, you can do it in many, many ways. Even the principles that we have in Islam, those are, of course, going to be the best. But when we have had many years of unmindfulness, sometimes it can be helpful to begin with something very simple, and that's the breath, paying attention to the breath. So when we are mindful, what we want to do is we want to build our muscle of having focus and attention. So you can pick any one thing, and you want to bring your focus and attention to that one thing. In psychology, the breath is the easiest thing that we can use because it's right there. You don't have to, nothing fancy, you just focus on your breath, right? You can do it anytime, anywhere. You can do it even if you are surrounded by a million people. Nobody will know that you are practicing mindfulness. So how you practice it? You bring your attention to one thing, for example, the breath, and you just pay attention to that. The nature of the mind is that our mind creates a million thoughts in just a few moments. And so the challenging part is to be attentive to that one thing. Your mind will want to wander. It's going to want to think about many things, like happens in prayer, right? Like as soon as I stand for prayer, I remember all the 10 things I was supposed to do, and I forgot until I stood for prayer. So that's what will happen when you are practicing mindfulness. And your job is to say, okay, I notice my mind has wandered, and you just bring it back to the breath, to that thing that you are focusing on. So you can even do it with like a mantra, or you can do it with dhikr, right? The tasbih. When you're saying the tasbih, whether it's the tasbih of Sayyidah Fatima Zahra or just Ya Allah, focus on that one word, and you really pay attention to what you're saying. When your mind wanders and you notice that, you bring it back to what you are doing. So that's a very simple kind of explanation of it. There is internal awareness, there's external awareness. So some people are more internally aware, so you're constantly aware of your thoughts. Other people are really externally aware, like, you might have a friend who, one pen will drop, and they'll be like, what's that sound, right? So everybody is different, and you want to build the muscle of attention and awareness, and the more you do it, the better you'll get at it. And I would recommend it. The optimal is like 40 minutes a day, but that's like, really, really good. But even if you just do 5 minutes of mindfulness exercise in the morning or any time in the day, you will notice not only your focus and attention will be greater, you will notice that you are able to, the gap I talked about earlier, the gap between the emotional experience and the action, you will notice that you can notice an emotion such as anger before you act on that emotion. So, what I used to do is when I would go to work, when I had the 8 to 5 kind of a job, I would go sit in my car 5 minutes before I go upstairs to see my clients. I would do my meditation and then, move on with my day. You could do that during before Fajr prayer, after Fajr prayer, but even just 5 minutes will have a tremendous effect. If that feels too long, start with 60 seconds. 60 seconds, timer on, notice your breath, and move to 2 minutes, 3 minutes, etc.
Sister Musarat. I think we all learned something new. Inshallah, we will be able to implement mindfulness in our own daily lives. So these last 2 questions, so we have 2 more questions, inshallah, are kind of like both of these, so feel free to answer them both. The first question being, how do we support our loved ones who are experiencing issues, and then what's the importance of seeking help when experiencing mental health issues. So the first question can be kind of reasons for and then Dr. Kate jump in. So how do we support our loved ones who are experiencing mental health? So more specifically, as college students, we have friends who we see every day, and they're like, I'm depressed, or I have this and that going on. How, as being friends, how can we support them?
Yeah, so I have a couple of suggestions for that. The first thing that I want to start with is walk the talk. What I mean by that is, remember the definition of mental health that I shared with you. People will talk about their disorders, but it's really, really important that you pay attention to a healthy mental health lifestyle. So first, you make sure that you are taking care of your own mental health, and that you are having a good support system, all the things that I talked about earlier. So that's the first thing. The second thing is when a friend or a colleague or anybody turns to you and starts telling you about something that's happening, is be mindful and be mindfully listening to them. So really listen to them, really allow them to share their emotions. Don't judge, and most of the time, I would say don't give advice. Don't tell them what to do. The reason I say that is because they're turning to you, they're opening up, they're becoming vulnerable. And so it's really, many times what we need is somebody to listen to us, to understand us, to let us know that our pain is real and that that's okay, and it's okay. If it is an instance where they are, kind of in the worst of situations, then you can let them know that it's okay to seek support, and you may give them advice like, go see someone, talk to someone. Do you need my help doing that? Third thing is, don't be afraid of their emotions. If they're feeling depressed, don't be afraid to talk about it, to let them talk about it. And there's this fear that sometimes we have that if you ask someone, are you having suicidal thoughts? Do you want to kill yourself? Then maybe you will plant that idea in their minds. This is not true. When you say it out loud, you're giving them permission to say that, yes, I'm having these thoughts. And then that's their way of asking for help and support. And then you can say, well, it's not something I can help you with. Let's call a professional. Let's go talk to a professional. So just by asking someone, are you having suicidal thoughts? Are you at that point where you have a plan, you want to do something? It's not going to give them an idea to do that. Okay? That's not true. Let them know it's okay to seek help, and encourage giving support and helping them to get support. So ask them how, if they need help finding somebody to talk to, if they need help getting the professional support. If they have an appointment and maybe they're feeling anxious about it, you can go with them. Let them know, hey, I can go with you. Don't go inside with their, in their appointment, but in the waiting room. You take your homework, do your work there while you wait for them. Or, offer to give them a ride. But in any way, just let them know, like, I can support you by, taking you there, giving you support. Another thing that's really important that we do, again, this comes back to the self, is that it's really important that we stop using words like crazy, nuts, insane. I'm not crazy, I'm not nuts, I'm not, stop using these words, we all have, like Dr. Kidd said, even the Prophet, right? We have these emotions, sadness, fear, anxiety. These are all normal emotions. We would not be human if we didn't have them, okay? Talk about it gently. So what I mean by that is that it's important that we don't over-discuss, like we don't need to tell all the details. I think that's really better if we say that for a professional, but we also don't need to brush it under the rug, right? So you can, you may be, for example, let someone know, hey, I have anxiety and I have trouble in groups. Would it be okay if I came with you or you gave me some support? You don't have to tell them, like all the details of your whole life and why you have anxiety, etc., etc. You can save that for, some professional or a really, really close friend or an adult who will know how to support you in that. I think that's all. So I think those are some suggestions of how you can support each other.
Inshallah, we have one more last question. Dr. Conclude us with the discussion tonight. So, from like a doctor's perspective, what's the importance of seeking help when going through mental health?
Okay, that's a good question. The importance of seeking help. Just in regards to that last question, one thing I would also just add when you're trying to help people, one thing I would say is don't try to fix people. Like that can oftentimes backfire. If you want to help your friends, just be there. Just listen. If they like to do something, just do it with them. You don't have to talk about mental health to help someone with mental health. You see what I'm saying? Like, you don't have to try to fix people, right? People will naturally default to their normal fitrah. They're in the right environment. Just create a good environment. That's what you have to do. You don't have to talk about their issues. You don't have to talk about their abuse. You might have to, but you don't have to, right? It's not necessary. So that's one thing just to keep in mind, case by case basis. But sometimes all you need is just to be present and someone just feel that there's someone else in their life. Honestly, sometimes it's as simple as that. So that's one thing. The importance of seeking help. All these psychiatric and psychological issues, by the way, there's a difference, okay? So narcissistic personality disorder is not the same as schizophrenia, okay? One is a psychological issue, the other is a psychiatric issue. Everybody understand the difference? Okay? One gets treated with drugs, the other gets treated with, let's sit down and talk, okay? The importance, well, one thing to know in terms of like the importance of seeking help, all this stuff is on a spectrum. You understand what I mean by that? When I say it's on a spectrum, okay? Like general anxiety disorder, it's not that you either have it or you don't, okay? You also have anxiety. Anxiety is on a spectrum. The people at the end of the spectrum have general anxiety disorder, okay? But you might be like somewhere in the middle of the beginning and the middle, okay? You also have anxiety. Anxiety is on the spectrum. Depression is on a spectrum, okay? Even some psychiatric issues are on the spectrum. Narcissism is on a spectrum. That means you have all these things as well, okay? So don't think that if I get help or if I think I need help, then I'm just some weird person that has some weird condition and no one else has it. No, everyone else has what you have. You just have it at a different level, okay? Sometimes that helps, all right? The other thing is the importance of seeking help, okay? Is people will always see something from a perspective you don't see it in, okay? You will never ever, doctors are not allowed to self-diagnose. Did you know that? We are the worst caretakers of ourselves. I haven't seen a primary care physician, I don't know how long. Okay, it's been years since I've been to the doctor, okay? We're the worst people to take care of ourselves. And we know this, okay? But the minute someone else starts to talk to you and they, oh, wait a minute, you got this, you got, well, maybe you should, people will always see things from an angle you don't see yourself in, okay? And everyone could potentially benefit from talking to someone who is a professional in psychological issues, right? Everyone would benefit from that, all right? So it's not a stigma. And we have to get rid of that, especially in our community, where we have this Disneyland notion of faith, that if you have Iman, you have this weird force field that doesn't let any type of evil depression or sadness get to you or something like that. Because Disneyland is not, okay, that doesn't exist, right? Reality is very, very different, okay? There is no stigma seeking help for mental health. Absolutely no stigma. Very normal. We don't see, is there a stigma for getting drugs for diabetes? No. Is there a stigma for getting drugs for hypertension? But those are diseases. Those are conditions. Okay, we don't even call it disease. We call it condition, right? So why is there a stigma for seeking help for depression? That's also a condition, right? Your mental health is just as important as your physical health, right? So all these things, it's just one continuum. It's one spectrum. Spiritual, physical, mental, we're holistic creatures. And that's it.
Thank you both for those insightful questions, and thank you, Dr. Pia, for reiterating the fact that it's okay to get help, and the fact that there is a stigma surrounding that, and when there shouldn't be a stigma. I think it's important for people to know when they're going through mental health issues that they're not alone, and that they do need to reach out to their loved ones, and because their loved ones do care for them, and if their loved ones are not there, it's okay to reach out to professional help, and there shouldn't be a stigma around getting professional help either.
So inshallah, thank you guys for those answers. We're going to conclude our session with this activity, inshallah, led by Sister Musarat, followed by the activity. We're going to have a Q&A section. So we do have index cards, I believe, that we're going to be passing around if you guys have questions, or we can pass out the email to you guys, and you guys can just ask questions. Okay, let's get started with this activity. I do see some of you guys not paying attention or sleep, like my dad over here is sleeping over here. Let's wake up, all right? So if you want to hear us with this activity.
Okay, so, right. Everyone will participate in this activity, and I want to stand up for it. So, some time ago, I had stumbled upon something called laughter therapy. And it's a yoga therapy where laughter causes, what happens when you laugh? Yeah, we feel good, right? So there is a thing called laughter therapy where people go to these groups and they laugh for 45 minutes to feel good. So inshallah, I will try to do that in here. And I was kind of inspired by Dr. Kia's talk that I found on YouTube about the Prophet always smiling, right? And a smile is generosity, it's kindness, and it's beautiful. Okay, so everyone, this is what we're going to do. So we don't have to have a reason. I'm not going to put on some funny YouTube video here, but inshallah, you're going to be able to create laughter from within yourself. And you're going to laugh, and so the thing is you want to try to have a good belly laugh, because that's when you laugh for about 45 to 90 seconds, that's when the feel-good hormones get released, okay? So we're just going to start by, you're going to take a deep breath in, and then on your exhale, you're going to say, ha, 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 okay? And then we're going to take a deep breath in, and then the next exhale, you're going to try to laugh, okay? So I'll start over again. Deep breath in. Good, good. Okay, deep breath in. Inhale, exhale, ha, 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 ha. Inhale, deep breath in. Exhale, laugh. Ha, 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 ha. I see you laughing now. You can look at each other and also make each other laugh. I see you laughing. Where's Dr. Q laugh? Okay, did everybody get at least one chuckle? Okay, so you might not feel comfortable going on for 5 minutes here, but this is something you can do to make yourselves feel good. Even thinking about it makes you laugh, right? Even thinking about it makes you chuckle. And how many of you feel a little good inside right now? All right, wonderful. And those of you, if you don't feel good, you better be chuckling on your way out so you can start to feel good. All right, thank you.
That was really funny. Alright, so we have the Q&A section now, inshallah. So if you have no questions now, or if you just have questions that they don't mind asking, feel free to. But we're going to try to get to as many questions as possible. We have to be out of here by 9:50ish. So we have about 20 to 25 minutes for the Q&A section, inshallah, and then we have closing remarks. So does anyone have questions that they just don't mind asking? I'll start with this hand first. Yes.
Yeah, I have a question for Dr. Kia. I was listening about the story, talking about the prophet going up the mountain to seek revelation, and when he didn't, he felt sad. But then you went on to say that we don't want to use the word press on the prophet because that's not befitting of the prophet. So I was just wondering if that perpetuates the negative connotation that's of depression itself. Because is it okay to set, but is it not okay to be depressed? Because that's what you said. Yeah.
Everyone hear his question? That was actually a really, really good question. Everyone hear what he said? Because I said when I was speaking, I said we don't want to use the term depression because it's not befitting for the prophet to speak in that way. And he turned around and said, well, wait a minute. Are you then saying that is a negative connotation? Because the whole point of this talk was to take away the negative connotation. I actually didn't think about that. That's a very, very good point. I'm very glad he raised that. To address that, it is not a negative connotation. However, in some people's minds, depression means different things. And you can't control what people think when you use a term like that, okay? And so to protect the prophet from what people might assume, it's better just to not use that term. However, if you were to use that term in a particular context, in a particular way, and say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protected the prophet from this, that's totally okay, and that doesn't take anything away. So what he's saying is actually very, very, very important. The Prophet Muhammad struggled with every single human struggle that we struggle with, right? قُلْ إِنَّمَا أَنَا بَشَرٌ مِثْلُكُمْ. In the Quran, Allah tells the Prophet to tell people, I am a bashar, just like you are. Okay? There's a difference between bashar and insan. Anybody heard of these two terms in the Quran? Bashar and insan. Okay? Bashar and insan are both translated as human. But bashar, when the Quran uses the term bashar, it is everything that is physical about human beings. Okay? Our hormones, our minds, okay? Everything that is physical about us, okay? And when it comes to the Prophet Muhammad and all the struggles of going through life as a physical human being, I'm a bashar just like you are, okay? Insan is different. Insan is everything that's not tangible about a human being, okay? Insan was created naive, right? Insan transgresses in that insan sees himself as independent, right? وَالْعَصْرِ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ. I swear by the time insan is in a state of loss. That's not tangible. Okay, that what's talking about there is our soul and what is not tangible. There's many, many more ayats like that talk about the intangible aspect of what is a human being, which is insaniya. The Prophet is not like us in that aspect. Insaniya is much, much higher, right? But in his bashariya, he's just like us. In all the struggles we have as bashar, all the prophets had those struggles as well. So I'm really, jazakallah khair for raising that. That's a very good question.
I have a follow-up, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah. Because when you were mentioning, you were saying that how if you have faith, there's this thing where you say we are supposedly immune to mental illnesses if you have iman and all that kind of stuff in psychology. We call that spiritual bypassing.
Wait, no, that's not what I said. I said faith doesn't make you immune.
Yeah.
Okay.
So your bypass, for example, I'm being sad about a bad day or something. I'll have my mom come to me and be like, why are you sad? I'm like, I'll tell her and she'll be like, oh, you know what, you should just pray.
Oh, I see.
Yes,
Like the communal tendency.
Yeah. So that is what spiritual bypassing is.
I see.
So I was wondering if you knew how to explain spiritual bypassing from an Islamic point of view, because I know how to do it in a psychological point of view. My parents would understand, but they might get it coming more from an Islamic standpoint.
It's another very good question. Spiritual bypassing. This idea that you can bypass your anxiety, your depression, your PTSD, right? Your post-abuse trauma or something like that by just praying more, right? Or making more dhikr, or doing these things. And the idea there is you're almost using prayer and dhikr and all these things like a shortcut, like a cheat code or some video game or something like that, right? That just lets you get out of the situation that you're in. The thing to understand is that there's no shortcuts in religion, okay? And none of these things were ever meant, okay? None of these things were ever meant to just let you bypass a particular struggle that you're having in life. All of these tools, prayer, dhikr, all these things, they are there to help you manage, not bypass, okay? So there is something called spiritual management, okay? There's no such thing, there is like a term, but it doesn't actually work to try to bypass your problems by praying more. In fact, you know what the downfall of that is? You start to see prayer and dhikr as not working. Because you're like, I prayed and I made dhikr, it's still there. My post-traumatic disorder is still there. My phobia is still there. My depression is still there. So prayer doesn't work, right? That's not what it was meant to be. Prayer was meant to push you more and more towards Allah with more and more prayer to help you manage this. It could be that Allah put you in this situation to push you more to prayer because you weren't doing that before, right? Prayer is not just some tool that you use, not a button that you press. It's not a lab order that you make, okay, to just make this problem go away. And it doesn't work like that. If you start to see it like that, then you run the risk of beginning to see religion as irrelevant. It's irrelevant to what you've created, which is a false thing in the first place, right? But it was never meant to be that. It was meant to be there to help you manage, not bypass.
All right, so we're going to read some one question from the comments, honestly. We're going to take another question from the crowd, just trying to split it evenly.
So the first question is, could you elaborate on some mental health resources, like community resources, helplines, etc.? I think you'll be able to answer it.
Yeah, so usually at a university, there's always a counseling center that's the most accessible for students. So I would say, go to your main university website, look it up. There has to be a mental health resource for you guys here. I actually don't know off the top of my head what is the hotline for mental health, in this area. But I'm happy to look that up and send it to you guys. And there are lots of Muslim therapists in the DMV area. So one resource that I can name is Psychology Today. Is a website where they have a bunch of articles and things, but there's also a therapist directory, and you can search for therapists through that. You can even say like religion, Islam, female, male, things like that. So that's one resource that you can use.
And I also wanted to take a chance to answer the question. So there's a website, as Sister Musarat mentioned, there's a lot of Muslim counselors in the DMV area. There's a list of them on the website called muslimcounselors.org, and you can look through the list and contact them as needed. And also, I think majority of you guys are Mason students. There actually is a free resource that you guys can go to on campus. It's called CAPS. It's in sub 1, level 3, I think. Level 3. And you guys can go there for free counseling. I would highly suggest you guys use it because that's what your tuition is going towards. And if you're interested in going to them, there's a bunch of brochures in the back table that you guys can take a look at and just take with you. But yeah, so there are a lot of resources. Just make sure you're asking around and just remember you're not alone. There's help everywhere. So.
Can I give a book recommendation?
Yes.
In terms of resources, anyone here hasn't read Carol Dweck? Anyone heard of Carol Dweck? Mindset? No, I haven't read it. It's like it's like mandatory reading in like so many public schools now. It's a book about changing like your perspectives and mindset, and I think it's really good for college students because it's all about how you begin to define success. You know, do you define it as a fixed mindset, or it's all just about a number at the end of the day, or do you define it through growth mindset, which is about the process? And I think that book in and of itself is quite revolutionary for people in how they begin to address their mental health in terms of anxiety and a lot of anxiety that can come about, you know, just from like it wasn't too long when I was here. You know, you're really competing for high pre-med scores and stuff like that, and you know the concept of success can be a really stress-provoking, you know, issue. So I think that's a really good read. The Charisma Myth by Olivia Fox, which actually talks a lot about how to use meditation to help you through stressful situations and visualization techniques, which is really good. I think that's a great resource. There's a really good book called Presence that came out recently by Amy Cuddy. It's all about how your body language significantly affects your mental health. This is a fascinating book, and like you'd be amazed with the degree of science that's out there with how slouching can actually increase your level of depression, and sitting up straight and raising your hands up and like, you know, kind of like fighting against gravity can help you kind of have higher self-esteem. There's a lot of interesting works that's being put out there right now because this is actually a multi-billion dollar industry.